Okay, turning to another subject about Ontario librarians who are warning that the province's new education funding model is contributing to a decline in school libraries. The Education Ministry argues funding has not changed, but the Ontario Library Association says money that used to go to just libraries is now being pooled with other resources like guidance counselors and school supplies. Michelle Arbuckle is the association's executive director and joins us now on the line. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Dave. Nice to see you.
Glad to have you. What does this practically mean for school libraries?
It's a good question. If you grew up in the 80s or 90s, not to date us, but I suspect that you were similarly a library kid. If you grew up in that time, you have a real idea of what your school library looked like. You knew what it felt like to go there. You knew how often you went there and why you went there. And the reality is, the situation in schools looks much different today than it did back then. So we know that over the past 20 years, hundreds of thousands of students in Ontario have lost access to their school library and to the critical resources that they need in those libraries. And that situation just became worse over the course of the pandemic.
What do you mean they lost access? Like the school library is closed or it's not open for as many hours? Or what do you practically mean there?
In many cases, because of the way that funding has worked, school libraries have been defunded, or there are teacher librarians or library technicians at a part-time basis. So the school library might only be open one day or one day every other week. There are certain boards. The Windsor Essex Catholic District School Board has no school libraries right now in that school board. In northern regions of Ontario, only 11% of schools have libraries on a full-time basis. So it's a pretty dire situation.
Why?
So over the past few years, under this same government, there had been an envelope of funding for school libraries, which meant there was funding provided, there was funding protected for school libraries. We also had some data that came back from school boards, so they were able to report to us on what they were doing with that money. If they underspent on their school library, had to come up with a plan and a vision to report back to the ministry on how they planned to address that gap. But as of April of this year, with this new core funding model, that envelope was removed entirely, along with any of those accountability measures. So that quote that you said at the beginning around the Ministry of Education focusing on the critical importance of literacy is great and wonderful to hear, because we know it's so important for students. But we also know students can't hope that school boards will make the necessary investments in their school libraries, because school boards are faced with tough decisions on how to allocate funding. And we know there are many school boards that already aren't funding school libraries.
What do you see as the role of a school librarian in an environment where students so often turn to Google, turn to what is available online for sourcing?
Well, or even Jeffrey Hinton talking about AI this morning. How do we teach children how to engage ethically and properly with AI and use it? Because it's definitely not something that's going away. If Nobel is,
there's no question ChatGPT has made its way fully into our classrooms. Yeah, whether teachers want it or not. Yeah.
And teacher librarians and school library staff are trained specifically in how to engage with students in that. So homeroom teachers might not have that same exposure, but we know school libraries in many cases are even, they're more than books. They're teaching kids how to interface with those technologies. Many school libraries have things like podcasting studios and maker spaces, but books can't be forgotten. The reality is the school library is the one place in the school where students have access to find what really interests them. And that's where they have the ability to build that one critical skill that's foundational for all subjects. We talk all the time about kids needing to develop a love of reading, but the reality is if they're not good at reading, they're going to struggle to be successful anywhere. And they're not going to be interested in reading unless they have something that they want to read. We know that a genuine interest in reading helps build literacy skills that are essential, not just for all your subject areas, but for your whole life.
Okay, so what are you calling on the province to do? Because their argument is the money's still there, it's just not dedicated.
Totally right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the Safer School Libraries campaign isn't about money. The money is already there. They're correct. School boards received the exact same amount of money. It's about protecting the money in the way the same government has for the past few years, money that's already been budgeted and ensuring that we have accountability around how those dollars are spent. So we have a Save Our School Libraries campaign up on the OLA website. You can use the Google to get there. Join the campaign, sign the petition. But most importantly, we need to make some noise and let MPPs and school boards know that school libraries are important to Ontario.
All right. Michelle Arbuckle, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, David Common.
That is Michelle Arbuckle, who's the Executive Director of the Ontario Library Association.